you are replaceable. Like no matter how senior you are, you could be a VP, you could still get fired, you could still get laid off and let go. And so I think that's a very grounding fact in that I am not my job. I am Karen, and my personal philosophy is growing 1% every day through finding inspiration to share with the world. And so if I ground myself and everything I do around this personal philosophy, then regardless of the job title, I'm still me. I still feel grounded to who I am and that I'm still making an impact in this world.
Welcome to the Tech Unlock podcast, where we demystify emerging technologies and give you the keys to unlock your successful tech career. I'm your host, Grace Macjones. Let's unlock the future together.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Tech Unlock podcast. I am excited to have my first guest for the year, Karen Ngo. I am so excited that we're having a discussion because we are passionate about the same things, which is career development, storytelling, and we're here to help the people know how to get a tech job in 2025 and how to stand out because it's hard in the stream. So welcome to the show, Karen. How are you?
Thanks, Grace. Super excited to be here. And yes, growing in your career, it's not easy, but it's not impossible. And so happy to help and be here today.
So let's get started. What is your tech hot take for this season in 2025?
Ooh, okay. So I think obviously a big term out there these days is AI. And there's so many people that feel bogged down because they feel like AI is going to take away their jobs. And I would say that my hot take is that's not a bad thing because years ago, when I was an intern, I had a senior vice president as my mentor. And she told me that no matter how senior you are, no matter how skilled or experienced, you are replaceable. And so I've always kept that in the back of my mind because it's like, you can either get laid off one day or, someone else can take your job, someone younger, someone more knowledgeable, someone more experienced, or it could be a piece of technology that takes over your job. And so I think once you detach yourself from the role and the function, you are a lot more free to focus on what are the transferable skills and soft skills and other experiences you have that AI can't replicate and cannot transfer at this moment. So I think that's something that really helps me overcome any of these fears of being replaced because I still think about my mentor's advice. I'm replaceable at any moment, right? Like AI could take over my job, someone else could take over my job, but what can only I bring? And it's this career development perspective that not a lot of people have, or it's the experience where I'm presenting to other students on career development and career walking decks, or maybe it's where I'm able to automate things in a way that is just a lot quicker because I have the context that a piece of AI currently doesn't have. So I would say that's my current hot take in that we shouldn't be afraid of AI taking over our jobs because at the end of the day, if someone else can do your job, what makes you so special, right? Like you should focus on something else, harnessing a different superpower that only you can do. And that's a great opportunity for you to focus on the stuff that is much more impactful instead of the stuff that can be easily replicated or automated by a piece of technology.
I love it. Wow, you came out the bat swinging with the bat term or hot take. It's so interesting that you said that because I do feel like people are like, oh yeah, AI this, AI that, but it's like, okay, so what if AI takes over your job? What's next? Like, let's not keep having the same discourse of like, oh no, or being, toxic positivity. Like, no, AI is not going to take your job, like, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, it could. And are you prepared for that?
Exactly. And there's just so many other skills and experiences that you could be building that maybe you're more interested in. Because that's what, in a sense, I feel like AI is there to do, right? It kind of takes away those monotonous tasks so that you can spend time doing things that are more important. So like for me, I've always loved automating my work because then I could go and do more volunteering or extracurriculars, or dedicate my time to higher impact projects or learning about a new topic. And that's stuff that I wouldn't get to do if I was bogged down in all the monotonous stuff.
Yeah, that is so true. And so I hope people listen is like, yeah, like it's not, I feel like that conversation is let's wrap it up in 2025. Like it's okay, yeah, AI might replace you. And so it's like, what's your exit plan? Or what are you focused on building in terms of your skills? So right now you are in the CEO, the communications manager in the CEO's office. Is that correct? And so I know you haven't always been in communications. How did you get into this career field?
Yeah. So, to give a bit of background, I studied business in university at the University of Calgary. And then I spent my last semester abroad in Singapore where I did a bit of marketing.
Nice.
And I came over to Microsoft as a new grad in Canada. So I was one of about 20 Aspire new grads that got hired in the year 2020. So during the pandemic. And I actually entered as a sales operations program manager. And I had no idea what that was. But when I entered into the role, it was a lot of data analytics, business insights, developments, and a lot of understanding the business as a whole. And so for me, like within my first month, I had to present to our senior leaders on how the business was performing. And so that really meant trying to understand what was going on in the business and what was the business we were in. In my space, it was modern work and security. And then in that first year as a new grad, because it was the pandemic and there weren't many opportunities to meet people in person because they shut down the offices for 2 weeks, and that ended up being like 2 years, I decided to go and find people to meet on my own. So I set up like 100 coffee chats, just trying to meet people around the business in and around.
Coffee chats?
Yeah. Yes.
Virtual coffee chats?
I almost had like one every day to meet someone new in a different part of the business and just learn what's out there. Because I was brand new to the Microsoft ecosystem and I didn't know very much about the company other than, Windows, PC, and all like Microsoft Word. So I had a lot of learning to do. And I just found that people have so many cool career paths into the company and through the company. And the biggest piece of advice I got was do what gives you energy and follow your passion. So when I thought about that and reflected, I realized I really loved storytelling. And when it was time for me to figure out, what was my next move going to be, I started looking for roles that centered around storytelling. So that was either sales, marketing, or communications. And when I applied for a few roles, I was lucky enough to meet a manager, Mark, who took a bet on me because I had no comms or PR experience or background. I didn't study it in school or anything like that. But he did see my career walking deck in our job interview, and I think that stood out to him. And so he took a bet on me, and that's how I joined the comms function in 2022. So that's about 2-3 years ago. And then recently this year, I was recruited over to our office of the CEO for CEO communications. And so the exec comms function is also very different from the media and PR side that I've learned over the past couple of years.
Okay. Wow. A lot to unpack there. And it's interesting to see how I think you've taken whatever you've learned in the previous season of your career and helped you transition. Would you say that the coffee chats that you had, which I think was really smart because obviously during COVID, it was hard to get connected with people. There wasn't any physical networking events you can go to. Everything was online. Do you think that led to you maybe meeting someone who was willing to take a chance on you? Or do you feel like it was different components that helped you get that opportunity?
So I think the networking piece just helps you understand the art of conversation and connection. So like having 100 coffee chats, it really just taught me that no conversation is the same and no person is the same. Yes, there are themes that come out of those career conversations, and those are some of the themes that I like to share in my blog. But ultimately, everyone has a very different journey. And I think that is kind of what you want to appeal to when you are writing your own career story and you're presenting your career walking deck to your manager in an interview. Because they're going to ask the same questions to everyone. Why do you want this job? Why are you a fit for this job? What do you bring to the table? And what makes you special is the journey and the experience that you're able to build. It's like that career narrative and how this next role is going to fit into your North Star or your personal philosophy. And I think when you're able to connect with those different parts of yourself through conversations with other people, through a lot of reflection and introspection with yourself, that's where you build a very strong and well-rounded narrative for both your life and your career. And so I think with that guiding me, that's kind of what helped me stand out when I'm talking to hiring managers, because one of the biggest pieces of feedback I get is that I'm very self-aware. And I think that is really important, because once you're self-aware, you know what your strengths are and you know where your growth areas are. And then you know how to adapt and you learn how to be nimble and flexible. And so it's kind of like understanding how to flex all of those different things at different times, to appeal to what the hiring manager is looking for in that team.
Yeah, I think something that you said that I want us to like go a little bit deeper in is the art of conversation. Working in tech, people don't think about that. It's more like, yeah, it's like how much technical skills do I have, or do I have enough certifications, which are all important. Don't get me wrong. Please make sure you know your stuff. But what is helpful to those who are non-tech or even technical is being able just to communicate with people. And to your point, being self-aware about, okay, well, how do I carry myself? What do I bring into this conversation? What does my energy feel like? And people don't really think about that. And I think that is something that takes a lot of practice. And so obviously outside doing 100+ chats, you're like, oh, okay, so this is how I am perceived and this is how I talk and this is the energy that I bring. So if someone is listening to this right now, like, wow, like I don't really know my communication style, like what advice would you give them outside of like practicing, multiple, one-on-ones to help them improve their art of communication?
Yeah. So I think when it comes to having a great conversation with anyone and how to talk to them, I would focus on three things. The first one is having a lot of prep. So before you go into meeting someone, do a background search on them. Bing or Google their name, check out their LinkedIn profile, see what they're doing, what they're up to. And this kind of helps you understand who is this person a little bit more than just their name or title. And based off of that research, you then want to go into step two, which is crafting very unique questions, stuff that's going to make them think and stuff that's not too generic, because we've all had coffee chats where people are asking the same things. What do you do? How did you get to where you are? Like, what did you study in school, right? That stuff you can easily find on a LinkedIn profile if you look. And so it's kind of, what are those level 2, level 3 questions you can ask that are actually going to get them to pause and think? Because once they do that, they're going to see you as someone who actually cares about them, someone who is a little bit more aware and mature, insightful, and can have an interesting conversation. Because I've had many situations where someone will pause and think, and they'll be like, I've never been asked that question before. And then they kind of just sit there in silence for a couple seconds trying to think of like, how do they even respond to it? And I think that is something that stands out. And it's kind of like the element of surprise that gets them engaged in the conversation, versus if it was something they've answered a million times before, they're just gonna give you the typical spiel and then move on. So that's kind of like step 2. And then the third one, I feel like it's so important, like as you're practicing this curiosity, it's how do you process that curiosity, right? Following up is so important. Sharing your key takeaways from the conversation. And if they actually gave you advice that you acted on, following up like months later and saying, hey, this is what you told me to do. This is what I did. And this is how it worked out or didn't. But I think that makes the person feel heard, because I talked to so many people, like hiring managers, other peers, and they're like, all these people, they keep reaching out to me for coffee chats, and then I never hear anything from them afterwards. And they feel like the loop hasn't been closed, right? It's like they've been used. They gave 30 minutes of their time to share their insights, their advice, their experience, and then they just never heard anything back. And so that's kind of what drains some people, and maybe that's what makes them not want to have conversations in the future. So I think for all of us, if we're going to be asking someone for their time, we should make it them know that it's valued. And so the art of the follow-up is also something I think it's really important in closing that conversation and closing the loop.
I 100% agree. I think people are burnt out of just giving out so much of their time and energy and not seeing it become fruitful, any action taken. And it's like, okay, why should I keep, doing this when people are not following through or following up? And it can definitely get exhausted. I've received those DMs on LinkedIn, and it's like, oh, okay. There's after that is like nothing. And so thank you for sharing that. Now looking deeper into your career, you mentioned that there are some things that you learned in terms of like being a communications manager that was kind of new into the new role that you are in right now, which I think you started, a few months ago. So kind of give us an insight. What does a day in the life look like for a communications manager? What are some skills needed to thrive in this role?
Yeah, so I think exec comms is definitely a new function for me. Like I'm learning something every day, which is interesting. I think it's really important to be adaptable because in the world of an exec, they're making big decisions and they're also moving very quickly, right? And it's important that when you're in the office of your executive, you're adapting to those needs and whatever they need. So that's kind of one of the big things. Kind of like, how do you look around the corner and anticipate some of the things that are going to happen? And even if it's something that you didn't anticipate, what are you going to prioritize to make this next priority happen? And I think that's one of the big things I've learned so far is like adaptability and flexibility, very important skills to have. And then I think another one is being creative, because a lot of the times so many things are happening and it's important that you streamline certain processes so that you can keep the engine running and it's smooth and seamless. But at the same time, I think that creativity is what makes things interesting and can actually help kind of the office come together and do something kind of cool and different. And so I think that's also a pretty refreshing perspective that I get to have, especially with all the energy around AI, Copilot, and agents. That's a pretty big focus for the whole company and even on our teams. Like, how do we use that to make our workflows better? So I feel like that's pretty exciting. And how do you be creative and bring energy and creativity to your processes? And I think that's with any team that you're on. How can you automate things? How can you make them better? Improve the experience so that people are not spending too much time on the things that they don't like to do and are spending more time on the things that they do like to do. So I would say those are probably some of the skills that are really important. And then being organized and keeping track of everything is really, really important. So whatever tools you're using, it's important to, take notes and mark down what are your actions, what do you need to do, and follow up on it, because there's so many things going on all the time. It's up to you to be accountable and close the loop, follow up when you need it. If you're not hearing back, what are you going to do to get it done? Because people are very busy, and that's with any team that you're on. People are always very busy. They have a million things going on, but how do you keep driving things forward to get what you need to do done?
I love that. I love that. And so with all of that in place, I can imagine that working in the office of the CEO or with any executive can be very, very stressful. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with the stress and just the expectation just to continue to deliver and to be organized and to do everything that you just mentioned?
I think that stress is a mindset, and like it's really a matter of perspective. Yes, working in an exec's office, especially office of CEO, it can be high pressure, high intensity, and a lot of things going on. But at the same time, it's how are you reacting to it and how are you staying grounded to why you're there, right? At the end of the day, I'm here to execute and get things done, and I'm here to do it in a high quality way. So what do I need to be successful? And it's being resourceful, right? Like, you got to be resourceful and look for the answers yourself, or find the people who know the answers and get what you need. And at the end of the day, I think it's understanding what do you need to do and how are you going to get it done, and kind of staying true to how you like to do things, because otherwise you may not be enjoying the work. So I think it's important to kind of balance those things as well.
So you just talked about stress being a perspective, and I love that so much. But I think that comes with the privilege of having experience within what you do. If someone's listening right now and they're like, "Oh man, I would love to work in communications management," what are some tangible things that they can do? Because right now in the job market isn't encouraging at all. It's been really bad in the last 2 or 3 years, give or take. And there are folks who work in the technical roles, in engineering, and we're cooked. Like, has been taking over our jobs. Things are moving offshore to different countries. But if someone who is curious, I'm like, oh, I love storytelling. I love the work that you do. how can they go about, getting to this position? And obviously, like you said, stress comes part of it, right? The mindset that's like, okay, this is what you need to prepare for. Like, it's not going to be easy, obviously. But these are the things that you need to watch out for. How would you encourage them to go about their job search journey?
Yes, I think so. The topic stress that we just touched on, it applies to job hunting too, because honestly, job hunting is a struggle on its own. It's like a job on its own, if I'm being honest. And I think it's similar to stress being a mindset where you just need to be really mindful of like, why are you here? Like, why are you facing the struggle and facing the challenge, or why are you avoiding it? And with job hunting, it's clear that maybe you're there because you need a paycheck. But I think you're more successful when you understand that you're going into a field or applying for a job that you're really excited for. It's not just about the money, it's actually something you care about. And I think that's what a lot of people are actually missing these days. They're kind of just applying for a million jobs, whatever is available, because they just need something. And I get that. Like, you need a paycheck. Everybody's got to pay their bills. But I think like true fulfillment, like you're going to be spending 8+ hours a day in your job. Even if you are getting a good paycheck, if you're miserable, is that really worth your mental health or worth, that time where you could be spent doing something that makes you smile and that you're actually energized about, or something that you actually believe in? And I think those are some of the reflective or introspective questions that people should really take the time to navigate before they actually apply for a job in the first place. I know for me, when I was in university, instead of applying for like a million jobs in my last year of university, I was very curated. I maybe applied to a handful of jobs, and they were only the jobs that I was like, I really want this company. I really want this job because I feel I'm going to learn and grow a lot in it. So instead of applying for like dozens of jobs like my friends did, and what a lot of people do, I chose maybe 5 or 10. And those were the only ones I cared about. And I carefully crafted my resume and tailored it to each of those job postings. It took a lot of time, but I felt that quality was better than quantity in that sense. And I would say the same applies to communications or any role. But if we're looking at communications in general, from what I'm hearing from comms managers, hiring managers, it would be having that journalistic perspective is pretty important. A lot of people I've met who are in the comms field now used to be journalists. They used to be reporters, broadcasters, and they kind of know how to get to the point, what's important and what's interesting, and how to spice up the messaging. So those are some of the things that are important. Another one is really understanding the consumer, because in the media landscape, it's very saturated. There's so much news out there. There's so much information, and our brains kind of just block all of it, right? Like it's just noise for many of us as consumers. So how do you think in the mind of a consumer and appeal to them in a way that's going to get their attention? So I think understanding storytelling is really important, and just how do you grab someone's attention and give them what they need to know in the first 10 seconds? Because outside of that time frame, they're probably going to move on to the next video or the next post on their social feed. So I think that's another big thing that the comms profession is kind of evolving towards. So working with like creators, because they are people who consumers resonate with more. And that's an interesting one. Or influencers, people who we really look up to as role models and take their word more seriously. That's also another discipline that I think the comms profession is evolving towards. So any experience in that space is pretty cool, I would say, and pretty relevant to where we are in the comms function.
That's so insightful. I never thought about having the journalistic perspective, but that makes so much sense, because it's like no matter what company that you're in, you're reporting and telling the story, and people's attention span is so short. So you have to know how to get to the point. What are the facts? Like, what do they care about? So that they're getting the most value from whatever that you're putting out. So thank you for sharing that. And something I wanted to talk about real quick, and you've talked about it in terms of like the job search, is how you had a career walking deck. And if people don't know, you have an amazing blog where you have a great examples of walking decks and resumes because you're passionate about career development. What made you start that blog and what led you to creating your first career walking deck?
Ooh, okay. So what led me to create or start my blog, kakirism.com? It was actually back in university. So back in high school, I had a food blog. I really loved just blogging about food, like that I was eating. But then as I got into university, things got super busy. So I kind of stopped doing that. But then I started missing the writing piece and I wasn't sure what to write about. But then I started having a lot of friends and peers come up to me and they're like, hey, you're meeting with all of these executives, like senior leaders, mentors. What kind of advice are you getting from them? And because I heard this so much, I was like, I might as well just share my key learnings and takeaways to help other people because I understood that not a lot of people kind of put themselves out there and network as much as I do. It was a fear that I had. I was actually terrified of networking in university, but I made it a goal to learn how to do it and talk to people. And I wanted to share those learnings and takeaways and advice because I felt like it really helped me stay inspired and motivated as a student. And I wanted my peers to also, leverage that if they could in their careers. So that was also one of the reasons I wanted to start the blog. Another one was people kept coming to me to help them with their resumes. So I was like, all right, I'm going to have a more formal system. You guys submit through my resume rescue service through a Google form, and I will take requests through there. At first, you can treat me to like a bubble tea or whatnot. And then from there, it kind of just spread through word of mouth. And so now it helps over 200 people around the world, Singapore, India, Brazil, with their resumes in kind of just getting it to a better place. So that's been a lot of fun. That's kind of how the blog started. And eventually, as I continued having these conversations, hundreds and hundreds of them now, at Microsoft, I found many hiring managers who were talking about this concept of a career walking deck. So I don't take any personal credit for creating a career walking deck concept because it was something I learned when I was at Microsoft. And managers were like, yes, this is a good way to tell your story, introduce yourself in a coffee chat, use it in an interview. And I was like, wow, this is genius. Like, why doesn't everyone have a career walking deck? Why? Like, everyone has a resume, but not many people have a career walking deck. And so I felt very passionate about this job hunting asset because I saw the potential of it. I was like, this could be a very powerful storytelling tool, something I was very passionate about, which is storytelling, but it's also a very powerful career tool. And so it was kind of like two things that I was really passionate about. So I started creating my own career walking decks and using them in my own job hunting, in my own presentations, and in my own coffee chats. And from there, other teams heard about it and they would invite me to come and talk about it. And like, how do you build a career walking deck? Because everyone has maybe heard of it, but they don't really know what that actually means. What does that actually look like? So I invested a lot of time in talking to managers, looking at different examples of what a good career walking deck looks like, how do managers like seeing in a career walking deck? Why do they think it's important? And so I kind of just curated all of this knowledge and experience from across people in the company and put it into a series of blog posts to help people get started with creating a career walking deck. So if I'm being honest, when it comes to standing out in this job hunt, in this job market, having career walking deck is your number one way to do that. And number two is networking. Like, those things kind of go hand in hand. If you want to be good at networking, you need to be good at starting a conversation. And a career walking deck is the perfect way to do that because it's a visually engaging presentation about yourself and who you are more on the personal side. And that's something that another professional can't take away from you. Because if you're looking at all these different resumes, a hiring manager is going to have a short list of people who have very similar skills and experiences. So skill-wise, you're going to be quite similar. So the way that you actually stand out to them is if you have something that is more personally connected. And that's where the career walking deck, I think, is a big game changer. And I think it's the evolution of a cover letter.
Absolutely brilliant. And I have a ton of questions about the career walking deck. Even though, like, I've been on your website, but for those who are listening and watching, what are the components of a career walking deck? And do hiring managers really have that time? Because I believe that people are like, oh, with the resume, you only get 5 or 7 seconds. And so why would someone want to see a whole presentation? Like, how long does that last? Like I know it's worth doing, but I just feel like some people are like, okay, like what is a career walking deck? And like what part of the job search is it after I get the interview, before I get the interview? Do I slid into their DMs or just send them my career deck? Can you just walk us through the process of how someone can build a working career walking deck and come out with something successful?
Yeah, so I think the beauty of a career walking deck is you can literally use it in almost any situation where you're meeting people. So I love to use it in a coffee chat. So if you're meeting someone for the first time, just pull one page out of your career walking deck and be like, this is who I am. And that's already one way that you can engage someone. And then when you are going into your job interview, you're going to be asked, tell me about yourself. Who are your skills? What are your experiences? Again, a career walking deck is a really great way to answer those questions in a much more engaging way. And when it comes to building your career walking deck, I have quite a few templates on my blog, so people are welcome to use those. But I would say the core components is building a narrative around who you are as a person. So we're looking much more at who you are as a well-rounded person and professional, and not just your professional experience. A resume is going to list, your experiences, your job titles, the dates you've worked there. It's very factual and it gets to the point on what your results should be. But a career walking deck is really an opportunity for you to express who are you as a person. Are you someone who is very passionate about volunteering with a specific group? If so, talk about that a little bit more, right? It gives you energy and it gives you life. And I think that is what is really important in standing out because, again, experiences, anyone can have similar experiences, but it really comes down to who you are as a person. What are your different and unique stories and narratives that you're trying to bring that set you apart and can make you an interesting addition to the culture and to the team? And a career walking deck is kind of a way to consolidate all that info in one place. So it answers some of the questions like, what are the things that give you energy? What are some of the top achievements that you have, whether it's personal or professional? So I've seen some career walking decks where people talk about, hey, one of my top achievements is having a loving family. And they have a big picture of their family and how they go traveling and everything like that. And I think, that kind of warms your heart a little bit, right? Like it makes that person real and they're not just a name and they're not just a resume. And so that's another one that's kind of like having those personal elements of yourself. And I like to include a slide that's called 30, 60, 90. So what I like to do is look at the job that I'm applying for, and I'll try to analyze what are the top 3 buckets of work that this job is going to need to do and what the hiring manager is looking for. So I think in the brain of a hiring manager. And then in my walking deck, I'll have a 30, 60, 90 page where I talk about here's the things I'm going to do in my first 90 days to make myself successful for this job. And I think that's where it really shows them. I've thought a lot about the job. I've talked to people on the team. I've done my research. And based on everything I know, here is what I believe I need to succeed and how I will succeed on the team. And I think that is something that really appeals to hiring managers as well, because it shows that you really care about the job and you want to succeed and you're already thinking ahead of it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It shows a lot of initiative. When you said 3069, it's like, wow, this person's already envisioned himself in this role and has done the research to make sure that, okay, they have a path to upskill and level up in whatever areas they need for this job. But also it just feels like, oh, they did their homework basically. And that's a great way of thinking out. And so from a logistic perspective, I'm curious, this is an actual deck. So it doesn't mean like, okay, if I go to interview like in person, I've like opened out like my computer, I'm like, hey, this is my deck. Was it more from a storytelling narrative? Like, okay, tell us about yourself and why do you want it? It's like, okay, this is something you already created in your walking deck so you can verbally say it instead of like showing a deck. Is that, I'm just guessing, is that what it is? Or it has to be always like slideshow after slideshow?
I would actually print it out and I would have it in a laptop or an iPad. Okay. So you can kind of choose which way you want to go. But what I like to do is before an interview, I will send it in advance in case they have time to take a look at it. And sometimes they do. So then when you go into an interview or to a coffee chat, they'll be like, hey, I already took a look at this and I noticed you have this experience. Let's talk about that more. And that's already starting the conversation. So that's one way you can do it. Other times they won't have time to look at it in advance. So that's where I like to actually present it in the meeting, whether it's on a screen or in like a hard copy. And they'll be like, oh, tell me about yourself. And I'm like, well, if you don't mind, I'd love to share my screen and present my career walking deck. And they'll be like, oh, okay, what is that? Like, they'll be kind of curious because not a lot of people ask them about it. And so that's already going to pique their interest. And then that's where you go, hey, ta-da, this is my career walking deck. And you kind of walk them through it, right? Like, it's not supposed to be rigid and structured. Like, you're not giving a formal presentation. I think that's a big mistake. You're supposed to engage them. So you're showing them a slide and then they'll be like, oh, okay, like tell me more about this. And you could kind of pick out one or two things that you want to highlight that you know are important to the manager based on your career conversations with other people on the team or from doing a lot of research on the job description. But I would say the career walking deck, ultimately, it's just a tool for you to keep the conversation interesting. It's not there as a crutch in a way. Like, it's not supposed to take over your resume and the interview questions or whatnot. It's supposed to supplement the conversation and give them something to look at while you're having a conversation.
And kind of to your point is that element of surprise, like, oh, I expect this. And it's like, oh, I'm intrigued. Like, I want to learn more. And you kind of have some type of control over the conversation because then they're coming to you with what you're presenting. And it's not just about, oh, yeah, here, the things that I built, my technical skills. Because already, if you're having an interview, you're qualified based on the skill set that they've seen in their resume. So this is a great way to stand out by having that element of surprise, but also just making sure that you're engaging and someone that's interesting. So I love that. And I love that you pointed out that you printed out because I was trying to logically, I'm like, how do I, if I'm in the room with someone or even if it's virtual, do I just, send that? So thank you for clearing that up. And so like, lastly, I would say, what are some, I guess, resources that has helped you in terms of like continuing to build your career? And you talked about a lot of like the art of conversation. But from a tenure perspective, were there any books or any organizations that has helped you kind of keep evolving within your career?
Yeah, so I think when I was joining the comms world, because I had no comm experience or background, a couple of the organizations I joined was PRSA, and there was also I ICBC, I think, or IABC. So PRSA is like the Public Relations Society of America, and then IABC is International Association of Business Communicators. So if people really are serious about the comms discipline and they want to, learn a little bit more about it, maybe they lack experience and exposure like I do, these two organizations could be a really good way to learn a little bit more about the art of comms. PRSA is a little bit more focused on like media, so like the external comms, and then I would say IABC is a little bit more focused on internal comms, like exec comms is an example. But both of them still cover both topics. So it's really up to you which one you're more interested in joining. And especially if you're early in career, they do have discounts for their memberships. So that's something to think about. Outside of that, I think for comms, and I think with any job in general, it's just go in and do the work, because that's where you're going to get the most experience, right? Like, yes, it's important to go to school, learn about it, but at the same time, the best learning in my experience and my own personal preference is just doing the work, getting actually that firsthand experience and doing it, shadowing someone on the job and seeing how they do it, shadowing other people to see how they do it, and then figuring out what style resonates the most with you and then putting your own spin. So it kind of comes back to what I said earlier about being creative. Like, you do that in exec comms, you do that in comms in general, and with any job. I think it's really important because that's kind of what you bring and add value to the table is when you introduce a new concept and it helps the team.
I love that. Thank you for sharing these resources because I wasn't aware of this organization. And lastly, as someone that works full time but also creates content, I'm curious, has creating content, creating your blog helped you in anywhere of elevating in your career? Because I feel like with all the tech layoff happening and whatnot, I think it's so important to have a life outside of your tech job and have skills outside of your tech job. I know it's helped me when I was running this podcast or, presenting in conferences and things like that. So out of curiosity, from the comms management, background career, has creating your own type of content, helped you level up in your career?
I think so because it kind of gives me a brand and a platform outside of who I am as a professional. So I think a lot of times people really tie their identity to their job title and their career trajectory. And when we have something like the layoffs hit, it really puts them in a tailspin because they question everything about themselves. And that's where I go back to my mentor's advice. Like, you are replaceable. Like, no matter how senior you are, you could be a VP, you could still get fired, you could still get laid off and let go. And so I think that's a very grounding fact in that I am not my job. I am Karen, and my personal philosophy is growing 1% every day through finding inspiration to share with the world. And so if I ground myself and everything I do around this personal philosophy, then regardless of the job title, I'm still me. I still feel grounded to who I am and that I'm still making an impact in this world. And I think that's really important. It's for people to really develop that sense of self, that identity that is separate from their job title, and moving more towards what is their personal philosophy, what is their North Star, who do they want to be as a well-rounded person. And again, these are all great reflections that will help you build a strong career walking deck. But then, coming back to your original question, I think it's really like, how are you going to show up for yourself and what is going to make the most impact and, getting you to do what gives you more energy.
Yeah, I 100% agree. 100% agree. I think our identity has to be rooted in things that are centered towards us and not really external. So I love that advice, and you've been 100% clear and vulnerable with that. So thank you so much for being on the show. We're going to switch into our lightning round where you can answer this question in 5 words or less. Okay, are you ready?
Okay, I'll try.
What is your current favorite app on your phone right now?
Ooh, favorite app on my phone. Okay, I really love Spark, which is a mail app, and it consolidates all your different emails in one place. It allows you to snooze them so that it'll remind you later. It's just a very savvy mail app. Like, it's amazing. So I love Spark.
Love it. Team iPhone or Android?
iPhone. I have an iPad and I take notes on it. Like, I love the ecosystem, so I'm sucked in.
Or a productivity tip?
Ooh. Favorite productivity tip? I would say time blocking. If it's not on the calendar, it's not going to happen.
Okay, love it. Your favorite book you've read recently?
I actually really love this book. I haven't read it recently, but it's called How to Live Without Fear and Worry. I found it at a temple when I was with my dad last year. It's by K. Sri Damana, and I really liked it because it was grounded in Buddhist principles. I have a Buddhist background, but it was also pulling a lot of inspiration from other religions and other philosophers. And I think kind of all of that wrapped into one book. It was really great in me just reflecting on life and not attaching so much of how I feel about things to objects and to people. And it's kind of more just being grounded in myself and accepting things as they are. So I feel like that book was a game changer when it comes to mindset and perspective, especially in tumultuous times like this in the world.
Love it. What's one piece of technology you can't live without?
One piece of technology I cannot live without, I would say, other than my phone, which is an easy one, I would say my heater in this really cold time.
Okay, that's definitely valid. It's winter, so I definitely understand. What is one piece of advice you would give your younger self?
Think of how you would react to a situation if you knew that everything was going to work out. I think for me personally, I'm guilty of having anxious thoughts and thinking of all the worst case scenarios and what ifs. But if it comes down to just think, like, what is the best thing that could happen and what if everything works out, I think you'll be a lot more confident going into any decision. And that was way more than 5 words. I'm sorry.
That's a great perspective to have. I love that. And lastly, what is one thing you're looking forward to in 2025?
Thriving. I think 2025 will be a year of thriving in a sense of just building on top of all the systems and platforms and everything that I have so far, embracing whatever comes, whether it's with, my friends and family and traveling or trying different things. I think it's going to be a fun year.
Yes, love it so much. Well, Karen, thank you so much for being on the show. I learned so much from your career and just the advice you've given. I know a lot of people listening and watching are going to find this very valuable, especially starting up the year. The career walk index are such a gem that I feel like a lot of people are not using. And it's one of those things that takes time to reflect and say, okay, who am I? What do I really care about? Instead of just applying to 100 jobs and feeling rejection and just kind of feeling like, okay, I'm not good enough. It's like, no, like, let me take my time to see what I'm worth. So thank you so much for sharing that. If people want to connect with you, what's the best way they can do that?
I would say definitely on LinkedIn. You can find me there, Karen Ngo. Or if you can just go to karenism.com, you'll find all of my latest content on there. And then you can always comment or email me as well.
Also, thank you so much for being on the show, Karen.
Thank you, Grace, for everything that you do to empower everyone in their careers. That's super awesome.